What are the ramifications of the border closures that we are seeing for the tourism industry?
Oh, it's absolutely huge from our perspective. What we're actually seeing is millions of dollars worth of cancellations in terms of the accommodation sector. So one resort in Queensland, for example, $500,000 in cancellations over the course of the weekend. Restaurants in Sydney, one particular chain has seen 800 people pull their bookings over the last week. In Melbourne, for example, one hotel, $400,000 in lost bookings, cancellations over the course of the weekend. So multiply that across the country and you're starting to see what this looks like.
Oh, millions of dollars. I mean, that's a big loss in itself. We know, of course, Margy, the industry has been particularly hit hard. We've seen the bushfires and now from the pandemic. Is it the case that a number of tourism operators might not survive this latest round of border closures?
I don't think there's any doubt that we're going to see business failures. And I think the other thing to keep in mind too is off the back of a level of optimism. Lots of these organisations have staffed up. You know, they've brought people in, put them back on the job. And of course, those jobs are not going to be able to stay. And that's probably the worst outcome just before Christmas. But the other part of this exercise is we really absolutely now have to have some level of certainty. Clearly, we are living with this virus now. It's not an emergency. It's something that must be managed, and it is an absolute priority that the National Cabinet and the state premiers come together and come up with a uniform set of triggers and responses. This uncertainty is going to be so devastating for our industry, but so confusing for travellers.
What about the impact on the airline industry? Prior, a couple of weeks ago, even when Queensland first reopened back to Greater Sydney, I remember a Qantas pilot telling me that route is so critical to Queensland tourism. What kind of an impact is the airline industry looking at now? Because they've put a whole heap more flights on and now they have to cancel them.
Exactly. So they've upskilled, upstaffed, put on extra flights to meet what they thought was going to be the need. All of that costs money. And then when you've got to take it back down again, all of that costs money. But it's also just the general uncertainty. We know back in June, July, during the middle of the year school holidays, when Victoria first shut down, 7 out of 10 Australians said they would cancel their holidays off the back of that. And that was people who largely weren't going anywhere near Victoria. So it has this amazingly detrimental effect on confidence. And I suppose if government, state and federal want to have a tourism industry, you know, this time next year, A, there's going to have to be a great deal of support for the industry, and B, we need this certainty and we need it now.
Certainty is a big one here. Yesterday, we heard the Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk saying that she will not reopen to parts of Sydney until there has been 28 days of no community transmission. Margy, that could be months away at this stage, depending on the state of the outbreak. Is that viable for operators? Months?
No. Absolutely not. And this is why we need some sort of agreed set of triggers and circumstances. You know, there may be this triggers the local lockdown, but what triggers a border closure? And can we make that uniform across the country? I mean, I got to the point now when people say to me, can you just run through all of the provisions for every state? I say, no, go check the websites because these things are changing so quickly and so frequently, nobody can be across it.
Just finally, Margy, Osmond, what would be your message for the tourism industry?
Well, I suppose hang tough if you possibly can. The bottom line is that the federal government and certainly some state governments have been incredibly understanding that this is impacting on the industry. Now they need to take that understanding out for a ride and get some uniformity around the triggers around the country. The time for the Frank Sinatra moment by premiers of I'm doing it my way is over.
Yep, who would have thought we'd be talking about Frank Sinatra in relation to border closures, but here we are, 2020. Margy, Osmond, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Danica.